Kia ora. My guest today is Dr. Lucy O Hagan, who is a general practitioner, originally working in Wanaka, moved away for a short period of time, and now back in Wanaka. She's written a book called Everything But the Medicine, which is a wonderful book, and I've now coined the term that I think she is the spiritual leader of the general practice tribe in New Zealand. And I've been telling my colleagues here, I've been a bit nervous about giving this interview because I feel like I'm interviewing the Pope. So I'm sorry to set it up like that, Lucy, but welcome to this Medics Voices podcast.
I do come from many generations of Irish Catholic peasants, but I don't think they presume to ever be anything like the Pope.
So I wonder if you just give us a little bit of background about you, where you grew up and what took you to medical school.
I was born in rural southern part of New Zealand, and my dad was a GP. My dad, he was a great fellow. He was the first in his whole generations of his family to go to university, and he had the Irish Catholic genes, and he was completely unintimidated by other doctors or their way of going about things. He thought that rules were made to be broken, and he was quite a charming and creative fellow. He was full of ideas, and so I think he probably influenced me to go into medicine. It was the 1980s, and we had this thing in New Zealand. There was a whole thing going on. Girls could do anything, and so I think that's how I ended up doing science subjects, but really I'm kind of more an arts person. I mean, science is fantastic, isn't it? And we love the biomedical model and we love being heroic and fixing people and doing things. But I think at heart, I'm probably more down the art side. I think when I went to med school, I thought, "Oh, I could go to drama school when I'm 40." Funnily enough, when I was 40, I joined a theatre group and started doing quite a lot of theatre. So there you go.
Well, I
But
always say I think we come out of medical school in love with our drugs and devices. And as you talk about, we have to learn how to be story doctors as well as biomedical doctors. I think that comes through your book very strongly.
yes, I love that concept of the story doctor because it feels to me that the consultation is this very awkward dance between biomedical science and human story. The patient comes with a story, and the biomedical science requires us to be very kind of cognitive and very rational and apparently emotionally detached. And we're supposed to know what it is and to know what to do and to fix it. And but the human story, the problem is that human beings aren't like that. The human story requires us to be sort of almost sensate and kind of subjective and creative in the way that we're thinking outside the square, not going linear, but going kind of circular about things. And also being comfortable not knowing. Because sometimes it isn't us that needs to know, it's the person who's with us who needs to understand. And so we might be facilitating that understanding in some way, but it's really them who needs to know. And it's so uncomfortable for doctors not to know and not to fix something. But actually, I mean, it's interesting. I don't know if you've read Arthur Frank, the wounded storyteller. He talks about illness narratives, and there's the quest narrative where we become ill. And we say, this is my opportunity to make my life better because I've realized I need to make things better. And there's a restitution narrative where I just want my life to be as it was before I got cancer. And then there's the chaos narrative, which is a beautiful description, really, I think, mainly of complex trauma narratives, where the narrative is just chaotic. It's chaotic being with the person. The narrative isn't linear. It's not even half the time spoken in words. And what he says about the chaos narrative is that our job is to sit still in it with the person
Mm.
and just be in it without any fixing or judging or anything. And, when you hear that, you actually recognize moments where you've done that and how powerful that is. Because
Yes.
I think when you can sit in it and not react to it, that tells the patient that they can also do that. That actually it is possible to sit in this
Yes.
absolutely awful story and
Yes.
for it to be okay.
You can
So,
sit and share the suffering of the patient.
yeah, and you don't, well, the thing is, it's a problem because we sort of, we sort of witnessing the suffering, I think, but witnessing it in a way that acknowledges it and, um, yeah, that acknowledges it, but we don't want to take it on. That's the problem, because we'll just get burdened and exhausted. So I think the trick is that and one of the things that burdens and exhausts us, I think, is the fixing. The idea we have to do something means that we've actually just taken it and I
Yes.
have to do something. So I'm now
Yes.
burdened with it. Whereas if we do something slightly different, which is to notice in this terrible, chaotic story what the strengths and capacities in this person are and actually see those instead of, because what we do in medicine is we see what's wrong. We actually write problem lists, don't we? We call them
Yes.
problem lists.
Yes.
We write, this is what's wrong with this person's story. They haven't got a home, they've got depression, they've got this, they've got alcohol problems, but we never write what's amazing about them.
Yes.
And actually, and we know this, because even when you listen to the most just awful story, I mean, part of you goes, how on earth did this person survive that? Like, they must
Yes.
be amazing.
Yes.
Like, how did they not crawl into a corner and die? And you just go, you're amazing. How do you actually do that? How did you get through all that? And noticing those strengths and capacities. And I think also asking the person what helps. Like, because they're already doing things that help. So instead of us coming in with, oh, you should do this, or you should try that, or, evidence suggests that if you do this, actually going, what are you already doing that helps you? And then when you've got a long-term relationship with someone and they want to keep coming to see you, then you go, what do you get out of coming to see me?
Yes.
And
Good,
then
good
and then you're
question.
kind of going, then you're accessing a part of them that goes, well, what actually helps me? And when I go to the doctor, I get this. So maybe I could get that from someone else. Actually, that person that I used to be friends with 10 years ago was like that. I want to go and get some support from them. And so they're actually engaged in thinking about what helps. And I think, um, and then we're into people having autonomy over their own story and giving them a sense that they have autonomy. And the other thing that that's needed for that is hope. And
Mm.
with people who have these really difficult stories often can't find the hope.
Mm.
And sometimes I think what we have to do is find the hope and hold it for them. It's really hard to do because you can't communicate hope authentically unless you've actually got it. So we do this internal dance in us where we go, and I think we can do it when we're an experienced practitioner because we've actually seen what happens to people over a decade or two, that people can do amazing things and they can transform their lives. And so when we have experience of that, we can actually say to people, this is going to get better. This is going to get better. And if you've seen them already for a couple of years, you can say, look what you were like when you first came here. Remember that. And you can become the person who notices the change that they
Yes.
can't see
Yeah.
themselves. And then when I talk to registrars about holding the hope, sometimes I just say, just pretend you've seen a lot of people who've got better. Because I tell you they do. You will know
The,
this in 10 years.
you had a nice line, finding the mana. Now, that's a Maori word in New Zealand. Do you want to explain what you mean by mana? Because I've started using that, particularly with the Maori patients, and you just see them rise about an extra, a couple of feet. You can just see them you can see the hope surging through them when you say, "I've noticed there's a lot of mana about you." So what do you mean by that? And maybe explain to the audience because this is an international
Oh,
audience.
yeah, I know. And mana is one of those words which is a Māori word, and it's really hard to translate into English. And I think that's why we started using it a lot in English sentences, because isn't it really an alternative word? And so to describe someone's mana is to say, like at one extreme, it might be their prestige. If they're a really important person, then they have mana. But everyone has mana. And so it's kind of at the other end of the spectrum with very disenfranchised people, it's might be more about respecting them and indicating that they have value and that you think they have value. I think that's so we talk about aki the mana, which is bring out the mana. So we can kind of do that in consultations, and it's quite a complicated process because um, there's a bit of a problem in the consultation with power. So we hold power, and even the room has power. The room that we consult in. I mean, and often it has our medical degrees on the wall and photos of some fancy holiday we went on, or and it holds all the medical equipment, which has sort of symbolic power. And actually, the room itself represents the power of the state, really, because it's state funded. And so, and we represent the power of these powerful professional groups. And so, we can't altogether avoid having power, but then we can say, how do we use power wisely?
Yes,
And and really think about that and articulate it. And one of the ways we can use it wisely is that if I see um, a highly traumatized Indigenous person, and I'm a what we call Pākehā in New Zealand, I'm a white middle class person. Um, One of the most powerful things I can do is treat them with love and respect and find their mana. That's using power wisely. Because how powerful is that? That someone who would normally be considered someone who might put you down or
yes,
um, treat you with racism or kind of treat you as not valuable. Um, how powerful is it that person might treat you with respect, absolute respect?
yes.
So,
It cuts through some of the resistance, doesn't it? Because people then are open to you can well, it's that tail wagging thing, isn't it? You talk about in the book. Maybe you could talk about the person coming in with the tail between their legs, and your job is to get the tail wagging, which I think is a great analogy. So could you maybe
some
elaborate on that? One of the great quotes in the book.
some people have found that slightly offensive, the idea that the patient leaves with their tail wagging. I actually defend it because I think that the dog's tail wagging is the ultimate um, kind of visual metaphor for the body and soul state of the dog, isn't it? And so we instantly know what that means. And we
Yeah,
go, I know what it means when the tail is wagging in the patient when they leave. And you actually want that. You want them energized
yes,
and feeling better than when they came in. And you also know what it's like when they come with their tail between their legs.
yes,
We know the feeling of that, don't we?
yes,
Um, that somehow well, and again, the Māori word would be whakamā, which is loosely translated as shy, but it means also has a sort of vibe of slightly intimidated or slightly threatened by the situation.
mm,
And so when we've got someone like that, then we have to, and that's where the power comes in. We have to just let go of the power and be very, and it's almost like mirroring, isn't it? Being
mm,
very small and gentle
yes,
and quiet.
yes,
And there's an interesting story about power. Um, which you may have heard the story before. It's quite funny. When I went and worked the last 5 years in a practice which is owned by Aotearoa, which is one of the local Maori iwi. And the patients there in that practice were nearly 90% Pacifica and Maori patients. And absolutely beautiful, fantastic people, but a lot of health problems, a lot of medical health problems, and a lot of collective well-being, actually, because they function in this beautiful collective. So never put anyone in a rest home. The old people were looked after at home, the disabled children were at home, all that kind of thing. But the thing that was interesting is when I arrived there, and again, I'm the sort of white person in this environment, so that's tricky in itself. When I arrived there, they gave me an office chair that you normally have at your desk that has swivel seats on it. And there's an interesting thing about chairs in the consultation room where the doctor's chair is always fancier than the patient's chair. And it's always slightly higher, the seat's slightly higher. And so there's a sort of slight gaze down. So I always tell patients to bring a cushion when they go to the doctor so they're on an equal footing. Anyway, I was given this chair and it had a fault in it. So every so often, completely unexpectedly, when I sat on it, the seat level would just plummet to the ground on top of the wheels. And I would be sitting there looking just ridiculous with my knees around my chin. And I'm absolutely fascinated by this because I think I was in that moment. The laugh was on me, but I was, and then the Maori word for this is whakaiti. I was made smaller. And because I was made smaller, it allowed them to be bigger. And like
Yes.
it just, it's like I couldn't have fabricated that or even imagine the effect that would have myself. It was just astounding. Yeah, it's
But
all
there
right.
was a quote in your book about the computer as the altar, going back to the sort of the doctor's office. And I chuckled at that, particularly now that I'm calling you the Pope, that actually your computer is your altar. And it is sort of like an altar. We worship at it and we do things to it and we give it things and it gives things back. Do you want to make a comment about that?
Usually is, and it's almost ceremonial what happens, isn't it? You know,
Yes,
there's a whole, and in the Maori word is tikanga. There's a whole ritual around what happens at that altar,
yes,
and
yes,
and I think what we're worshipping is the biomedical model, and
yes.
which is worthy of some worship for sure, and we want to get that right, and it's incredibly valuable. But the problem is that it has some limitations and it's not always the most important thing in the room. Sometimes it is, and sometimes the medical stakes are very high and we need to be attending to the medicine. But I don't think there's ever a situation where we should only attend to the medicine and not the story, because there's always a story. I mean, even you know, in a medical emergency, there's a story. If someone comes and gets diagnosed with hypertension, that affects their story because it affects well, it's what Arthur Frank calls an interrupted narrative. Illness is an interrupted narrative. And so their whole sense of the future has to shift. So
Yes.
there's always sort of story. And the problem is that when we worship the biomedical model, the consultation works best if the patient also worships it. But sometimes
Yeah, right.
patients
Yes.
don't.
Yes. Yeah, no, exactly. That's easy, isn't it?
That's really easy. Yeah.
Well, you had a quote in the book, page 189. The biomedical model, I've been taught, does not explain what ails them. They have relentless pain, chronic fatigue, the effects of abuse, mysterious symptoms, and complex mind-body overlaps.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's when the biomedical model is really not so useful. It's got parts that are useful. And that's the moment where we have to be comfortable not knowing. And we may have some suggestions. And actually, you know, some of the most powerful suggestions I give people are things that I've learned from asking other patients what's helped them. And I feel like I'm a conduit between the patients and they should just really talk to each other. Because, gee, interestingly, when you put two people together who have complex trauma and you listen to their conversation, it's incredible. They completely get each other. Like, it's fascinating to
That
watch.
sounds like a
They can
therapeutic intervention.
So yeah, there's a whole that's a whole conversation about peer support. But anyway, in the meantime, I'll be the conduit. And those things are just offerings. They're not our relationship isn't dependent on them doing what I'm offering. I think offering's a better word than suggesting or advising, because that implies some sort of that I'm quite invested in them doing that.
Mm. I sometimes say to people, you're the
And
boss, I'm merely your health advisor. And it seems to
yeah,
land
that's good.
reasonably well. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so becoming, now I loved your distinction of you have to be in primary care a good biomedical doctor and a good story doctor. And we were talking before we started the broadcast that I think to stay and enjoy primary care, you have to fall in love with the stories. If you just stay in the biomedical, it's pretty hard. You become a bit of an organ doctor. And I suspect
yeah.
our secondary, you've got a great quote about secondary organ doctors as opposed to primary care doctors. I could perhaps read that actually. Sometimes the specialist has no answer because the body part they deal with is not anatomically linked to the soul that is aching, or a mental health team uses a diagnostic categorizing app that gives a label which can be reassuring but offers no hope or meaning to the patient. Page 259, near the end of the book. I just about fell over laughing reading that. I just thought, and I have to say,
All done it.
I get
We've
the
all done it.
feeling secondary care has become a lot more organ focused. They can do the genes, they've got drugs that go for the genes, and it's become more. But I thought when I was a student, all of us would become more psychosocial. But I think secondary care has become more biomedical, and good primary care has become more psychosocial story. And in your term, I love the word story.
Well, but I mean, even if you're in highly technical hematology, you've got stories. I mean, still dealing with big stories because they're dealing with higher stakes medicine. And interestingly, like I mean, wasn't sure whether secondary care people would like this book, but it's actually incredible. People like surgeons, surgeons like it. I mean, and I think it's because whatever specialty you're in, you can always be in the situation where you don't have an answer. You don't know what to do, or you're dealing with someone who doesn't worship the model, or you're dealing with someone who's just tricky to deal with. So it doesn't matter what specialty you're in. You've always got a human dimension. And I think that, in GP training, we talk about that all the time, but if you're training in other specialties, it's not really talked about. I actually think that everyone should do the first year of GP training before they specialise, and then they would have ways of sort of thinking about these human dimensions.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, interesting. Yeah. One of the former professors of general practice in New Zealand was telling me about his atrial fibrillation. And his feeling about it was that his heart was bouncing off his vertebra. And I thought I'd never asked anybody we talk about the patient's got AF. And he actually, and I thought, gosh, I should have known that a long time ago. This is like about 10 years ago. He told me, I didn't ask him. I didn't say, well, what's it like to have that? And I think that would be a good question. Also, the thing I liked one of your quotes about the burnout. Just coming back to the burnout, you said the characteristics that make me vulnerable to burnout also make me a very good doctor. Would you like to elaborate on that?
It's what you alluded to before. I think some people are more naturally down the medical doctor end and really are not going to be that interested in getting deeply into the story. And I think patients sense that and they take themselves to the doctor that they need. And if you're a very like my sister would go, I'm never going to talk to a GP about my feelings. I just want my blood pressure pills and my blood pressure taken out of there. So she's going to be quite happy with a doctor who is quite transactional. Um, and that's fine because I think people sort of self-select.
Mm.
The problem is that that the doctors who deal with the complex stories, um, the problem is that we're not given enough time to do that. It's not really acknowledged. To me, that's a subspecialty of general practice. It's an interest area, but it's not, we're not funded to do it. We don't given any extra time. If I've said this recently, another interest area of general practice is skin cancer and skin cancer surgery. Imagine if we said, no, you have to do your skin checks and your skin surgery in 15 minutes. We would never say that.
No,
But
no.
when you're dealing with complex trauma that has, chronic health problems as well, yes, we expect you to do that in 15 minutes. So I think the problem is that with the sort of structure and support to that work. And then in terms of the burnout, I think that some of the things that protect us are the things I've talked about, which is when we're focused on the autonomy of the patient and them leading their story forward. That actually takes some of the pressure off us,
Yes.
I
That's
think.
a very profound point you just made there,
Yeah,
actually. It's the fixing that the monkey's on our back, as I say to my students, we're trying to do things to fix it. And sometimes it can't be fixed easily.
yeah. And then you can send them on their way, almost with you internally, kind of cheerleading them
Yes,
and sending them
yes,
with their story, knowing
yes,
that they have
yes.
some capacity to cope with it.
Loved your quote, overlooking a patient's sexual abuse is appropriate, overlooking their high cholesterol is not.
Mm.
And it's interesting how we're not chastised for missing the psychosocial usually, unless someone commits suicide, but we are chastised if we miss the cancer, the heart failure, the whatever.
Mm.
Would you like to make a comment about that? There's some nice
Well, I think
distinctions.
we still have quite a strong bias that the medical part of the consultation is the most important.
Yes,
And, when we're teaching GP trainees, it's really hard for them. You can see all these medical things that need to be done in this consultation, and there's all this preventative health stuff, and you've got to do all
Mhm.
this, and actually, but in general practice, most of those things don't have to be done today. Like the patient's not going to die if you don't deal with that today.
Yes,
But they might be harmed or really be in a bad way if you don't actually deal with the story. And
yes,
sometimes the story, sometimes you can't get to the medicine until you've gone to the story.
yes,
Yeah,
yes,
the story needs to be heard. And then in the hearing of the story, you're generating trust. Because there's a whole other thing about trust and how, and I've sort of alluded to it, when you're a Pākehā white person working with Indigenous people who've been colonized, then how do you get them to trust you?
mm,
Because you represent the people who've done them over. You
yeah,
represent the people from the justice system, the police, from the housing service, from the social security service, who don't necessarily treat them very well. And so you're not immediately trustworthy in your suit in your flash car. And so that's a really interesting question. How do you build trust in relationship? I love your idea of saying to people, you're the boss, because that's
yeah,
transferring power, isn't it?
yeah,
And there might
yeah,
be a different word for it, but
yeah,
it's giving them power.
yeah, yeah,
So that building of relationship is, and I think, we're taught to present ourselves as a doctor in a very formal way. And again, we have this with the GP trainees. Their presentation of doctor is quite formal. And sometimes to build relationship, you have to be less formal and more chatting and more relaxed and more humour. And it's really hard for them to do that to start with. But I
yeah,
think that GPs work that out because if you watched an experienced GP, they would be quite relaxed when they needed to be.
mm,
They'll put a bit of humour in, they'll do a bit of chat. And they've just kind of learnt to do that. No one's told them to do it. It's not in the communication skills models. That,
No, well, the whole thing about self-disclosure is quite interesting. We did a bit of research on that, and most people were taught not to do it in medical school, but most people actually did it from minor to major, even up to levels like divorce. You're divorced, I'm
yeah,
divorced. They
yeah.
would discuss it. They wouldn't discuss criminality, though. That was the only thing that would have been,
Mm,
they said they
mm.
wouldn't deal with.
And actually, the most common source of self-disclosure is around children, I think.
Yes, yes,
Yeah, and that seems like a safe self-disclosure.
yep,
Like,
yep,
oh yeah, when my child was sick, oh, it's terrible getting up in the night, isn't it? Or it's
yeah.
terrible in the night trying to work out how sick they are. Even I find that hard, you know.
Yeah, and I
So
think I
there's a
think that that's very soothing to patients. You made a and I love one of your little quotes about um, doctors don't like being seen; they like to hide themselves. Can you just talk about that a little bit? That's a
I
very
think that's part
profound
of
one.
the sort of medical training. And in the 1980s, we wore white coats, and there was a sense. I had this sort of sense, that me was invisible and that I was a white coat. And that's the very formal presentation, isn't it? But it's more than that. It's like, and it's part of the objectivity and the sort of cognitive rational thing is that we take the self out of it. And I guess that's useful in an emergency, but in general practice, we need to bring the self back in because
Yes,
people want to relate to a person. And I also think that reflecting on ourselves, and the reason there's a lot about me in this book is because I think that we need to acknowledge how our own stories have affected us and the way that we are actually bringing them into the room, even though we're not stating them. We're not saying our story, but I actually think that the patient senses it. They
yeah,
sense that we can tolerate story, and they sense that in us because we have tolerated story, I think. Yeah.
yeah. You're approachable. Nice quote, page one, 68. Small town. Being known made me a better doctor, less separate and distant.
Yeah, well, I think that's because they know who you are.
Yeah, yeah. They've seen you at
Because
the supermarket, and
they've
yeah,
seen your underwear on the clothesline, for goodness sake. Yes. No, they've seen you get changed at the swimming pool.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
you're not, and so the thing is you can't in that you can't really separate the professional and personal self when you're in a rural environment where you live and work in the same place. So what ended up happening is I just brought more of me into the room probably more rapidly than I would have. And there's
yeah.
problems with doing that because there's all sorts of problems about, consulting with people and all that kind of thing. But there's a sort of grey area in there that you can mine where you actually bring more of you in and it actually makes it better. Um, because you're sort of more human, I think. I think it did make me a better doctor. And I mean, there's the thing about small towns and stories, because honestly, you would like I went in my 30s, and I would be in a consultation with someone who had postnatal depression, and then I would see that person outside in the world, and you would have no idea that was going on, not a clue. And
No,
I'm like, wow, this is amazing. And then I would hear other people talking about that person and going, oh, she's a bit of a snob. And I'm going, oh my goodness, human beings judge people without any, like we
without
judge
knowing
so
the full
fast
story.
without knowing anything. And so that was a very profound learning in your early 30s to really understand that we have to be quite curious before we judge people. And very, very profound for GPs to realise that because we judge people as well. We come
Exactly,
to very
exactly.
quick, and so not to assume anything. Uh,
Also, I think when you bump into a patient publicly, I sometimes find it difficult to know what to talk about because I don't want to dive back into the details of the consultation. It can be a little bit uncomfortable. I don't know whether you had that experience. We must have had that experience 1,000 times.
yeah, I think, well, one of the problems is you don't even, I mean, in a small town, you might be introduced to someone at a party and you recognise them and you don't even know where you met them and you're thinking, oh, did I do a vaginal examination on you yesterday or did I meet you at the school pickup? So you just like
Oh, exactly, exactly. Well, that's exactly the issue I'd had when I met
you
this
learn
woman
to
on the
just
street,
smile.
you know. So we're nearing the end here, and I just wanted to have a little quote when Rebecca came into the office and said, "This is going to be a good consultation." I was dumbfounded. How did you know that? I laughed, slightly nervous that I may disappoint once I settled into my doctor's seat. Lucy, your friend said, Mary said you're able to look with your heart, and I made a quote here. This is a secret we all keep, this fear of disappointing patients. But we as GPs don't realize it until Lucy O'Hagan shines her light on it. And I think you have the skill of seeing what we all see, but you see it with a different lens and can bring it to life and put some light on it. Would you like to just to close on a comment on about that skill of yours? Because it comes through the book all the time.
Well, I think it's again, it's well, because I have, as I said to you earlier, I've studied quite a lot of the social science of medicine and had an
Mhm.
academic lens. So philosophy, anthropology, narrative, and in a Maori view. And that academic language is fantastic and the ideas are fantastic. But because I have this sort of creative bent, what interests me is how do you translate those ideas into a form that anyone can relate to? Because you can't, like, you read a social science paper, the first time you read one, you read the first sentence and you go, I don't even know what that means, like the
No.
languages. And so I wanted to write a book that in which the academic ideas are sort of almost hidden, but they're there. And so it's been quite successful in that way because, as I said to you earlier, it's been read by deans of medical schools, but also truck drivers and farmers and surgeons. And so I think because, in a sense, the human story part of it is really a universal and collective story.
Yes.
Because we all have roles where we care for people, don't
Yeah.
we? And everyone's been a patient. So they also have a take on what happens in the room
Yes.
and what is the doctor like and what are they doing and so mostly people can relate to that because they have an experience of it as well. So I think it's about trying to translate those things and democratize academic ideas.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
like
I
that
nearly,
idea.
yeah. I
So
was going
this
to.
is probably a good place to finish. So would you just like to just make a final comment to the audience? I'm reminding you it's a worldwide audience. What have you got to say to the audience at this point?
Well, I didn't expect you to ask that. I think the most wonderful thing in Aotearoa, New Zealand, is that we have a conversation with our Māori Indigenous people that is very profound in the sense that in medicine, they're really starting to affect the way that we think about consultation. So I think that we're actually developing a consultation model for Aotearoa New Zealand that includes, the Calgary, Cambridge, which is fantastic, and it includes patient-centered medicine, but it actually just pushes it a little bit further, because we're exposed to this other way of seeing. And I just encourage people to explore those other ways of seeing. Yeah.
Lucy, thank you very much. This has been wonderful interviewing you, and thank you for your wonderful book, Everything But the Medicine. So, been
Thank you for having me.
a great chance to talk to you. Thank you.